In the labyrinth of modern history, few names evoke a shadow as long and dark as mine, Osama bin Laden. I am a figure etched into the world's collective consciousness, known as the founder of Al-Qaeda, the mastermind behind acts that have scarred nations and defined an era. My life's journey is one marred by violence, enveloped in ideology, and marked by actions that have reverberated across continents. Born into affluence in Saudi Arabia, my path took a pivot when I joined the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, fighting against the Soviet invasion. This experience laid the groundwork for what would become a global movement, culminating in the tragic events of September 11, 2001. The repercussions of my actions have been vast and have sparked wars, global security measures, and an ongoing battle against terrorism. To understand the present, one must delve into the past, into the life of an individual who has become synonymous with international terrorism. As you embark on this journey through my life story, I invite you to engage with an open mind, to reflect on the complexities of history, and to grasp the threads of decisions that have woven the tapestry of current geopolitical dynamics. If the shadowy narrative of history intrigues you, if unraveling the complex tapestry of events that shape our world compels you, then join on this exploratory journey. Dive deeper into the annals of the past by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement is more than a mere click. It's a step toward understanding the forces that move the world. Give this video a like, press subscribe, and become part of a community dedicated to uncovering the profound truths behind the headlines. I was born on the 10th of March 1957, though the city of my birth has been a topic of discussion. It's widely believed now that I was born in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, contrary to earlier beliefs that pinpointed my birthplace in Jeddah. My father, Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, was born in Yemen in 1908, but moved north to the now Saudi region along the red coast of Western Arabia due to circumstances of the time. The land was contested between the Ottoman Empire and the Royal House of Saud during that period. My father found fortune in the 1930s as a construction contractor under the first ruler of Saudi Arabia, Abdul Aziz ibn Saud. Through royal patronage, he established the Saudi bin Laden group, which soared to immense success, amassing great wealth as Saudi Arabia became a global oil titan. My mother, Hamida Al-Atas, hailed from a Syrian family of accomplished citrus farmers near the port city of Latakia. She wed my father in 1956, entering into the union as his 10th wife at the tender age of 14, while he was 48. But soon after my birth, they parted ways. This led to speculation regarding the nature of their relationship, with some suggesting that they were never formally married. Growing up, I was embraced by privilege. By the time of my arrival, my father was already a multimillionaire. After my parents separated, my mother remarried Mohammed Al-Atas, a business associate of my father, and I moved into their household alongside my step-siblings. Despite the domestic changes, my father remained a significant figure in my life, nurturing in me a conservative religious zeal. My education commenced in 1968 at the Al-Taga Model School in Jeddah. And in 1971, I had a brief encounter with the Western world when I attended an English language course at Oxford University. My youthful days were marked by a typical fondness for football, particularly Arsenal Football Club, and a budding interest in military history. Although my early life had a semblance of normality, my background was far from typical, thanks to the extensive ties between the Saudi bin Laden group and the Saudi royal family. By the 1960s, the company was a significant entity in the Arab world, with significant contracts, including the renovation of holy mosques in Mecca and Medina and the recladding of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Tragedy struck in 1967 when my father perished in a plane accident in Saudi Arabia at the age of 59. The business, however, thrived under the stewardship of his sons from earlier marriages, diversifying and expanding throughout the Middle East. As I grew older, my life began to take a distinct path. In 1976, at 19, I enrolled at King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah to study economics and business administration, presumably to later join the family enterprise. But my interest veered towards religion, poetry, and Arab literature. Financial worries were foreign to me as I was set to inherit a substantial sum from my father's estate. By this time I was already married to my first wife, Najwa Kanem, a union that occurred when I was 17. Our family expanded rapidly, with Najwa being the first of my several wives and fathering over 24 children over the years. The late 1970s were a pivotal period in my life, where the seeds of my ideological beliefs started to sprout. I became enamored with the pan-Islamist ideology, advocating for a unified Muslim front across nations to defend and propagate our faith. This ideology was reminiscent of the bygone era of the Arab Caliphate that once dominated vast regions from Baghdad. The objective of reducing and, if possible, eliminating Western influence in the Middle East, which had been under British and French control since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, started to solidify in my thoughts. This phase saw the beginning of a path that later defined the course of my life and my historical legacy. The Iranian Revolution of 1978 had uprooted the Western-backed Shah, paving the way for a new Islamic state under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Simultaneously, the political landscape of Afghanistan was spiraling into chaos, as the Marxist People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, PDPA, seized power, marking the onset of a new era of discord. The Soviet Union, entangling itself in Afghanistan's political quagmire, invaded the country in December 1979 in a bid to support the faltering PDPA regime. The cries of despair from the heart of Afghanistan resonated across the Islamic world, beckoning the faithful to stand against the oppression. Heeding this call, I found myself in Pakistan soon after completing my studies, a nation that, despite its own denouncement of Islamic fundamentalism, became the gateway for many like me, seeking to aid the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Under the mentorship of Abdullah Azam, a Palestinian-born jihadist, my journey into the realms of active resistance began. Like a stream merging into a river, I joined the ranks of thousands of Muslim men flocking to Afghanistan, intent on repelling the Soviet aggressors. This was the birth of my active role in the Mujahideen, where I used my inherited wealth to muster resources and recruit men for the cause. Our struggle, akin to the gusts of wind carving through the mountains, was shaping the narrative of resistance against Soviet occupation. In the labyrinth of conflict, the battlefields of Afghanistan were brutal, with the Soviets wielding the scythe of destruction across rural landscapes in a vain attempt to quell the insurgency. The echoes of their indiscriminate bombings resonated across the globe, yet the Mujahideen, fueled by an indomitable spirit, carried the mantle of resistance through the vast stretches of the Hindu Kush Mountains. As the 1980s rolled on, the Soviet-Afghan war morphed into a quagmire for the invaders, mirroring the hardships faced by the Americans in Vietnam. Each dawn in those rugged terrains brought with it the hope of liberation, a hope that gushed through the veins of the Mujahideen, driving us through the veil of adversity towards the dream of a free Afghanistan. Amidst this crucible of conflict, my resolve was forged, setting the stones on the path that would later define the course of my life and the lives of many others around the globe. In the early 1980s, I found myself drawn to the rugged terrains of the Hindu Kush, weaving between Pakistan and the Mujahideen strongholds nestled in these mountains. It was in 1984 when my mentor Abdullah Azam and I formed Maktab al-Hidamat, a means to garner support both from the Arab and Western worlds to carry on our struggle against the Soviet oppressors. The funds we collected nurtured the Mujahideen, arming and preparing them for the battlefields. By 1986, our efforts had borne fruit, and my base known as Al-Masada, or the Lion's Den in eastern Afghanistan, became a sanctuary for hundreds of trained fighters. Our resolve was put to the test in the late spring and early summer of 1987 at the Battle of Jaji. Although the battle held little strategic merit in the grander scheme, it carved my reputation among the Mujahideen and within the broader Arab realm, a narrative propelled further by the budding Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The crucible of Maktab al-Hidamat was a prelude to a much larger narrative, setting the stage for a jihadist movement that would echo through the ages. As the war in Afghanistan veered towards the end for the Soviets and their puppet regime in the late 1980s, discussions among our ranks ventured towards the fate of our organization. Some envisaged a moderate path, continuing our strife against the Soviets. However, Abdullah Azam and I harbored a broader vision, striving for an overarching entity dedicated to repelling non-Arab forces from our sacred lands. In 1988, as Al-Qaeda came into being, a new chapter unfurled. Our ambitions transcended borders, aspiring for a unified front across the Muslim dominions against foreign intrusions, especially the Western grip strangling our lands. The doctrine of Al-Qaeda was clear. It sought to purge the Middle East and the broader Muslim world of foreign influence, a sentiment deeply rooted in the historical ethos of the Islamic Caliphate. As the war in Afghanistan dwindled with the 1989 Soviet withdrawal, my journey led me back to the heart of Arabia, Saudi Arabia. My return was marked by a hero's welcome, a tribute to our defiance against the Soviet giant. Yet, my reunion with my father's legacy, the Saudi bin Laden group, was short-lived as ideological rifts with the Saudi monarchy came to the fore, primarily over the South Yemen civil war and the ensuing Gulf crisis. August 2, 1990, marked a turning point, as Saddam Hussein's forces rolled into Kuwait. The world watched as alliances were forged, leading to a coalition of nations rallying beside the United States, as foreign troops amassed on the sacred soils of Saudi Arabia, my homeland. The schism between my vision and the Saudi regime widened. The storm brewed and unfurled its wrath on January 16, 1991, under the banner of Operation Desert Storm, a narrative that propelled me further down a path that history would remember, with a mix of dread and reverence. The initial agreement of the Saudi government with U.S. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney, allowing American intervention to shield Saudi Arabia from Iraq's aggression, struck a nerve within me. I felt a growing discontent and arranged a meeting with King Fahd, proposing that instead of U.S. troops, my Arab Legion, forged in the heat of Afghan warfare, be deployed to defend our sacred borders. My plea was brushed aside, and the U.S.-led military buildup on our soil intensified, a sight that fueled my indignation. The Saudi royal family's willingness to welcome Western forces on the land that cradled the holiest sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina, was more than a betrayal. It was a sacrilege. I voiced my dissent publicly, criticizing the Saudi government, and sought to rally the ulama, our revered religious scholars, to issue a fatwa condemning this unholy alliance. But my cries fell on deaf ears, and in 1991, I found myself exiled from my homeland. As I set foot in Sudan in 1992, leaving the aftermath of Operation Desert Storm behind, I felt a semblance of camaraderie with my hosts. The land, under the rule of Colonel Omar al-Bashir, and guided by the principles of Sharia, promised a refuge, a place to regroup and continue my quest. The Saudi Mujahideen were welcomed by Hassan al-Turabi, a prominent figure in Sudanese politics, which provided a semblance of hope. In the sanctuary of Sudan, my followers and I fortified our compound, laid down roots in the capital, Khartoum, and prepared for the long battle ahead. But even here, the eyes of the American intelligence were upon us, scrutinizing our every move, marking Sudan as a harbinger of international terrorism. The U.S. sanctions against Sudan, driven by their desire to curb our activities, began suffocating the nation's economy, and by 1996, the climate had changed. The once welcoming arms of Sudan were now nudging us towards the exit. I found my way back to Afghanistan in 1996, a land where the Taliban had just seized control, and where I could once again regroup. The declaration of war against the United States was a necessary pronouncement, marking the beginning of a relentless endeavor to rid our holy lands of foreign intervention. My expulsion from Sudan, the dissolution of my inherited wealth, only hardened my resolve and emboldened my steps on a path that seemed to be spiraling into an abyss of confrontations. The roots of Al-Qaeda's confrontational approach towards the U.S. had been simmering since 1990, when an FBI raid in New Jersey unearthed plans of terror against the skyscrapers of New York City. The 1993 truck bombing near the World Trade Center was a grim reminder of the growing discord, a narrative that would continue to unravel with further attacks in Yemen, Egypt, and eventually the horrific bombings in Tanzania and Kenya in 1998. The latter marked a point of no return. The simultaneous bombings, targeting the U.S. embassies, were a message, a stark expression of defiance that echoed through the rubble and the cries of the helpless. The world took notice, with my name and that of Al-Qaeda being etched into the annals of notoriety, landing us on the FBI's 10 most wanted individuals list. Though the years that followed would be marred by the shadow of terror, in my heart, it was a battle for sanctity, a fight to reclaim the honor and sovereignty of our sacred lands from the clutches of foreign dominion. In the wake of the U.S. Embassy bombings, my aversion towards the United States grew. The crux of my grievances stemmed from their support for Israel and regimes persecuting Muslims within their borders, like Russia in Chechnya, Philippines in the southern islands, and India in Kashmir. Above all, the presence of American troops on the holy lands of the Arabian Peninsula, near Mecca and Medina, irked me the most. In 1998, Al-Qaeda declared the U.S. occupation of Islamic lands for 7 years as unacceptable. Post the U.S. Embassy assaults, my focus and that of Al-Qaeda shifted towards a larger target, this time on American soil. The World Trade Center in New York City, a target Al-Qaeda associates had attempted to hit in 1993. Late in 1998, or early 1999, I endorsed the World Trade Center plan, initially proposed by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in 1996. The subsequent year was spent screening potential operatives in Afghanistan, prioritizing those proficient in English and acclimated to Western culture. Individuals like Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Sheikhi, Ziad Jarrah, and Hani Hanjour were selected. By 2000, 19 individuals had been chosen and were establishing their cells across Arizona, Florida, and California. The final plan, conceived in early 2001, entailed hijacking commercial airplanes to strike the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and possibly the U.S. Capitol. September 11, 2001, was selected for this mission, a date mirroring the day in 1683 when Ottoman expansion in southern Europe was halted, marking a shift in power from the Muslim world to Christian Western powers. This date was chosen to symbolize a turning of tides back in favor of Islam. On that fateful morning, the 19 hijackers, distributed amongst 4 flights, commenced their harrowing mission. The tragic unfolding of events is etched in global memory, the planes hitting the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the crash in Pennsylvania, marking the deadliest terrorist attack in history. The rapid media coverage amplified the psychological impact globally, making it an unparalleled act of terrorism. The actions of that day, driven by ideological beliefs and political grievances, left an indelible mark on the world. I denying the allegations regarding the 9/11 attacks initially. On September 16th, a statement of denial was broadcasted by Al Jazeera from my end. However, as time passed, the American intelligence service gathered evidence pointing towards me and my organization Al-Qaeda being behind the attacks. In 2004, a video surfaced through Al Jazeera where I admitted orchestrating the events of September 11, 2001, with 19 hijackers under my command. This admission was further substantiated in 2006 through additional video footage showcasing discussions with some of the hijackers prior to the attacks. The motivation behind targeting the Twin Towers was to symbolically retaliate against the destruction witnessed in Beirut in 1982 during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. At the time of the attacks, I was believed to be taking refuge in the White Mountains, south of the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan, near the Pakistani border. Promptly after the attacks, on September 18, 2001, the U.S. President George W. Bush's administration passed a resolution authorizing military force against those held responsible. The Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which had been harboring me and Al-Qaeda since 1996, was now a target, as they refused to surrender me to the U.S. The military action began on October 7, 2001, with American and British forces striking strategic points in Afghanistan. In collaboration with the Northern Alliance, U.S. troops and their allies swiftly made significant advances, encircling Kabul by early November. In one such airstrike on November 12th, one of my closest allies, Mohammed Attaf, was killed. The fall of the Taliban's last stronghold, Kandahar, came in early December, marking a temporary victory for the U.S. and its allies, although I remained elusive. Despite the interim government established under Hamid Karzai, insurgent revolts soon erupted across Afghanistan, marking the beginning of a protracted conflict. The closest the U.S. got to capturing me was during the Battle of Tora Bora in the White Mountains, where it was believed I was hiding. Despite the intense conflict spanning nearly 2 weeks, I supposedly managed to escape across the border into Pakistan, evading the insufficient Allied military presence. Now, I had become the world's most wanted individual with a bounty of $25 million on my head, later increased to $50 million in 2007. While my whereabouts remained a mystery, it's believed I spent most of the 2000s in Pakistan, alongside senior Al-Qaeda members, under a cloud of secrecy. Even today, the U.S. intelligence can only speculate about my movements during that time. The mantle of the world's most wanted man followed me, as the hunt continued and the threat from Al-Qaeda loomed over America and the Western world for years to come. I found myself in a world where the dynamics were constantly changing. The political landscape in Islamabad had over the years been nurturing to Islamic factions, although my presence on Pakistani soil was a line they could not openly cross. Despite this, a lenient stance was taken towards my capture, making it a hide-and-seek game with the U.S. intelligence, who received only tepid assistance from Pakistani security forces. After fleeing Afghanistan, the rugged terrains of Waziristan and northern Pakistan provided me with a sanctuary. Rumors floated about my relocation to Iran in the late 2000s, but the truth was that Pakistan's political and security apparatus, with its silent nods, allowed me a fairly undisturbed abode. This period was utilized to continue orchestrating our agenda throughout the Muslim domain. The repercussions of the 9/11 event were profound, as the United States fortified its security, making it a fortress difficult to penetrate. Yet the unfolding scenario presented an array of Western targets in the Middle East. The invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 by American, British, and other allied forces was the beginning, but the real essence of Western presence was soon felt in Iraq. The narrative took a significant turn when President George W. Bush and his administration started hinting at an extended endeavor to reshape the Middle East, targeting what they perceived as the cradles of terrorism. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, was spotlighted, and despite a lack of unanimous support from America's allies, the invasion commenced in March 2003. This new front was both a challenge and an opportunity. The rhetoric was that Hussein's regime was in cahoots with us, although the reality was far from it. My grievances against the U.S., particularly the economic sanctions imposed on Iraq post the Gulf War, were no secret. However, the conjectured alliance with Hussein was nothing more than a concocted tale. As the war unfolded, it mirrored the Afghan scenario. A quick dismantling of the Ba'athist regime was followed by President Bush's premature victory declaration. Yet, as in Afghanistan, the embers of resistance ignited a fierce counterinsurgency, marking the beginning of a protracted struggle. The unfolding chaos was a testament to the complexity of the geopolitics of the region, a chessboard on which we were but mere pawns, albeit with the potential to checkmate the kings. In the midst of the chaotic war-stricken Iraq, I, along with Al-Qaeda, entered the fray with a vision to unveil the cracks between the Sunni and Shiite communities. The aim was to ignite a civil war, tearing through the very fabric of the nation. Our methods were meticulous and precise. The bombing of the Al-Askari shrine on 22nd February 2006 was one such endeavor. Though the immediate loss of life was minimal, the repercussions rippled through the Shiite community, igniting days of sectarian violence claiming over 1,000 lives in its wake. As the late 2000s approached, America's troop surge of 2007, coupled with political reforms, began to mend the war-torn nation. However, Al-Qaeda's efforts endured. From my sanctuary in Pakistan, I orchestrated bombings in Baghdad, and a little suicide attack on the Shiite Imam Hussein shrine in Karbala in March 2008, claiming 42 lives and leaving dozens injured. Meanwhile, in the serene city of Abbottabad in northern Pakistan, a new abode was being crafted for my refuge. As the year 2002 marked my arrival in Pakistan, the construction commenced, and by 2005, a colossal compound stood amidst a sprawling 38,000 square foot estate, veiled by towering concrete walls and barbed wires. The fortress-like structure was my dwelling from 2006 onwards, offering sanctuary to my families and loyal followers, a stone's throw away from Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Though the compound was a haven, its conspicuousness was its Achilles heel. By 2009, U.S. intelligence had pinpointed Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, a trusted comrade since the skirmish at Tora Bora in December 2001, residing in Abbottabad. This led them to the peculiar structure that was my dwelling. Despite their prying eyes and sophisticated surveillance, they failed to capture concrete evidence of my presence. Yet, by early 2011, the amassed circumstantial evidence led them to the heart of Abbottabad. On the evening of 1st May 2011, as the sun cast its warm glow over Washington, D.C., Operation Neptune Spear was set into motion. As the world held its breath, Black Hawk helicopters pierced through the night sky of Pakistan, carrying the elite Navy SEALs towards the destined compound. Despite a rough landing, they pressed forward. The ensuing firefight claimed the lives of one of my sons and Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, the man whose presence had led them to Abbottabad. As the SEALs scoured through the compound, thousands of miles away, eyes were glued to the live footage streaming into the Situation Room in the White House, where anxious breaths awaited the conclusion of a decade-long manhunt. As the night approached, I could sense an unusual movement within the vicinity of my abode. The whispers of the wind carried with them an aura of foreboding. It was not long before the quiet of the night was shattered by the footsteps of fate climbing the stairs to the 3rd floor, where I resided. They had been given orders to extinguish the flame of resistance that burned within me rather than capture it. The room became a stage of conflicting narratives, as they who had come to seal my fate now sought to claim the honor of being the harbinger of my demise. As the hands of the clock neared the midnight hour, the relentless Matt Bissonette emerged as the one who would etch that moment in the annals of history. His bullets found their mark, and as I stumbled back into the abode of my final moments, I could feel the cold embrace of destiny. The aftermath revealed the fragile nature of our mortal endeavors. As they rummaged through the vestiges of my existence, they found a meager sum of 500 euros and 2 mobile phones sewn into my robes, a feeble attempt at fleeting hope should the tide of fate turn against me. My earthly remains were hastily concealed to prevent the ground that embraced me from becoming a monument of insurrection. As the wings of steel carried me to the vast expanse of the ocean, the world awaited the words of the leader from the land of liberty, announcing the end of a chapter filled with fear and loathing. But as the waves swallowed the last remnants of my mortal self, the embers of the cause I had kindled continued to burn, flickering through the veil of time, igniting the souls of the discontented. The world witnessed the emergence of forces that even I found too extreme, embarking on a path of relentless pursuit for a realm bound by the chains of a draconian ideology. I emerged as a key figure in the realms of modern Islamic fundamentalism, beginning my journey into the ideological abyss in the 1970s. My descent into radicalism was fueled by the writings of Islamic scholars like Sayyid Qutb. The opulent bin Laden business empire in Saudi Arabia, along with my sprawling connections across Saudi society, became the backbone of my endeavor when the Soviet forces invaded Afghanistan in 1979. I harnessed my resources to train and arm the Mujahideen, leading a relentless guerrilla war against the Soviets throughout the 1980s. My crusade could have ended there, a mere footnote in history, but the flames of Islamic fundamentalism within me raged on. The Gulf War laid bare my intensifying disdain for America, and sowed the seeds of discord between me and the Saudi royal family, whose actions I saw as a betrayal to Islam. As the 1990s dawned, a more sinister incarnation of me and my organization, Al-Qaeda, emerged from the shadows. The brutal bombing campaigns we orchestrated crescendoed with the U.S. Embassy bombings of 1998, spreading terror and claiming hundreds of lives. The saga of terror reached its zenith on the morning of September 11th, 2001. The ensuing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq became a staple of newspaper headlines, their horrors unfolding in living rooms around the world. The cataclysmic events of 9/11 were but a prelude to the rise of ISIL and a migrant crisis that swept across the Mediterranean as the desperate and the displaced sought refuge from the ensuing chaos in Syria and Iraq. My mortal coil was severed in Abbottabad, a fortified bastion that became my final refuge. But as I met my ignominious end, the world had already been forever altered by the tempest of violent extremism that I had unleashed.